everybody. My name is Ruth Ann Lane of Learning Lane, and you are tuning in to the Elementary Project-Based Learning page. Today we are talking about 5 tips to use cooperative learning in a PBL classroom. Now, my husband's away on business this weekend, which is kind of why I look like a hot mess, and why this video is going to be pre-recorded instead of live, because I have to put all 3 of my kids to bed tonight on my own. So send me some positive thoughts. I would greatly appreciate it. So today, because our poll on Monday had equal voting for the 5 tips for cooperative learning and also for 4 current events that can launch a PBL unit, today is a twofer. So I'm going to talk to you about cooperative learning in a PBL classroom right now, and then you have another video that's going to come using Screencastify, where I am going to talk with you about 4 events that can launch a PBL unit. So today we're going to talk about the 5 tips that I have for cooperative learning in a PBL classroom. Now, my first year of teaching, 8 years ago, which feels like it was just a blink, was the worst first year teaching probably of all time. I thank God every day that I was not fired, because I was a terrible first year teacher, and I told all of the teachers that I mentored that too, because it's important to be real, and being real, I was just awful. So my second year of teaching though was so much better. My students showed huge gains. I had an amazing classroom culture, and it was not because of me. It was because I went to a week-long Kagan workshop where I learned all about cooperative learning. Now, this is not a plug for Kagan. You can use cooperative learning without the Kagan structures. You can use protocols. You can use many different tools to promote cooperative learning. But my classroom culture was best built using cooperative learning. And so through that structure, I was able to really get my classroom management down pat. The great thing was, when I moved up from Florida to Indiana, I was able to use those cooperative learning structures in a PBL classroom. And I'm really excited to share with you a little bit of what I've learned about cooperative learning and how it relates to project-based learning. So let's go ahead and get started with our 5 tips. My first tip, I wrote notes, so I'm going to look. I hope that's okay with you. My first tip is to build a classroom culture that encourages cooperation. Now, we've talked about laying a strong PBL foundation before. In fact, there's another video that I'll link in the comments that we've talked about the key elements of a foundation for PBL. But I really think it's important to encourage cooperation among your students. One way that we can do that is encouraging a lot of talking in our whole group lessons. So structured talking. Structured talking. So for example, the gradual release model is, I do, we do, you do. One of the really cool cooperative learning strategies that is encouraged is a gradual release model with an additional step, the they do. So it's I do, we do, they do, I do. Or wait, you do. So that extra step is giving a chance for something like a think, pair, share with partners, a cooperative learning opportunity inside your whole group lesson. Just doing little simple things like that makes it easier to then ask for cooperation with your students in a PBL unit, because they're already used to it. In fact, this is one of the skills that you can teach outside of a project-based learning unit to lay that foundation for when you start PBL with your class. All right, number 2, pick a few structures or protocols and use them regularly. When you do something like going to one of the protocol websites where you're looking them up, you're gonna see hundreds of protocols. You're gonna see tons of structures in something like Kagan. Pick like 5 for the year and teach them your first year. So start off with something like think, pair, share. Then do something where you're doing a fishbowl protocol. These different structures and protocols, have them printed off and on a laminated paper on like a binder ring, and just have them with you all the time. You can also print them onto posters and post them in your classroom. This is really helpful for those older students, because then your students have the structures too, and they know kind of what it is they're going to be doing and what those expectations are. Just stick with 4 or 5 for your first year and slowly incorporate them. Don't try to do all 5 at once. Start with 1. Then after your kids kind of get used to that, go to another one, then another one. And then before you know it, by the end of the year, you're going to have 5 and you're just going to be pulling them out during your lessons because your students are going to be really familiar with them. So make sure though that you're limiting how many you add as you go. Okay, number 3. I think that cooperative learning is a great tool. But sometimes when you do a structure or a protocol in your classroom, if you have groups doing things, your students are going to have conflict. This is okay. This is not a reflection on your classroom management because conflict happens. Conflict happens between you and your colleagues. Conflict happens between students all the time. But what is important to make sure that you do is to talk with your students about conflict resolution strategies before they get going in any kind of group or cooperative learning environment. Talk with them about different strategies that they can use to resolve issues. Something as simple as, let's play paper, rock, scissors to decide whose way is the way we're going to use. Let's draw straws. Post those conflict resolution strategies somewhere in your room as young as first grade and kindergarten, and have the materials that your students need in order to do those activities. So for example, if one of my conflict resolution strategies is to draw straws, I should have straws next to my posted conflict resolution strategies so that students can just go to the baggie with the straws, take them out, use them, put them back in the baggie for another group to use another time. I should teach my students how to play paper, rock, scissors, or rock, paper, scissors, whatever way you want to call it. That way we know whether or not we're doing paper, rock, scissors, shoot, or we're doing paper, rock, scissors and saying what it is. It's important to talk about that with your students and to lay those rules or strategies into place before you post it. That way, when your students interact with conflict, they know, hey, let's go to the conflict resolution or conflict strategies poster. Now, sometimes those conflict resolution strategies won't work, and it's important to have a step in place where they can come to you. So, however many strategies you'd like for them to try, and then always make one of the strategies at the bottom. Okay, now you've really worked at it. Now you've gone back. Make sure that you go and talk with your teacher. All right, number 4. I think it's important to plan your protocols and structures when you're planning your lessons and units. Now, some PBL companies and PBL groups will tell you that you need to plan it in your unit when you very first start the unit. I tend to lean more towards wanting to plan it whenever you're planning those detailed lessons, because what happens is as you're detailing your lessons out, your brain is making more connections with those lessons than it does when you plan a general outline for your unit. So when you're planning those detailed lessons, it's a lot easier to come up with what structure you want to use and what best fits. I am going to post a link. I posted it on this site before. In fact, I think I posted it twice. But there is a way that you can look up protocols on a protocol website by the use that you're going to have for it. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. So making sure that you know what the purpose is for your protocol. So are you using it to reflect? Are you using it to encourage feedback with your students? Whatever the purpose is, clicking one of those tabs can bring you to several different protocols that encourage that. And then making sure that you choose the protocol that best serves the purpose that you want it to serve. Okay. My last one is to use tried and true protocols and structures. Don't try to create your own. That A, is really time consuming, and B, you have so much that you have to do already on your plate. Bless your hearts. If you're doing PBL, then you probably also have things for RTI and your IEPs and your 504s and all of these things that you have on your plate right now. You don't need to be creating your own structures on top of it. So use structures and protocols that have already been created. I would encourage you to use group contracts with your groups as you're using them, but there are tons of group contracts already created online for you. In fact, if you Google group contracts for elementary, there are tons of PDFs and Word documents that pop up. Try using a group contract that's already created instead of creating your own. or better yet, have your students create it. This would be a great thing looking forward to next year, next academic year. This would be a great thing to have your students do as you're laying your foundation for PBL. Or if you're about to start your very first PBL, having your students sit down together and talk about what a group contract looks like. What do we want our class to make sure that they're doing? What procedures do we want to put into place for making sure we're all cooperating and doing what it is that we need to do in order for that learning to occur? So, number 5, to clarify, is to not create them yourselves. There's tons of websites. I will link a group contract in the comments as well. There's tons of websites that already have them created, or if you really want to make your own, do it with your students. That way it's more meaningful and you don't have to brainstorm the whole thing on your own. All right, that is my 5 tips for cooperative learning in a PBL classroom. If there's anything that you still want to know about cooperative learning in project-based classrooms, specifically in an elementary classroom, feel free to comment in the comments below. I will be happy to talk with you, or you can send me a private message. If you're watching this video on YouTube, be sure to comment in the comments here on YouTube, and I will also answer it. But you can also join us on Facebook on the Elementary Project-Based Learning page. I'm really excited about next Monday's poll, and really soon, I'm going to have a blog to launch with tons more topics and categories that I'm going to be posting on our Elementary Project-Based Learning page. If you have questions that you'd like to ask, feel free to post them on the page, and I'm sure that we have tons of teachers that would be happy to answer them for you. All right, guys, have a great week.